Prof, thank you very much for having us again. We really appreciate you making time for us. Um, I want you to maybe lead us today. Um, I know the last time we spoke about, the era from the late Stone Age,
Yes.
and then we covered that until the late 1800s.
Yeah.
What are we discussing today? What would you want us to cover?
Okay, I've been thinking now. I've been thinking about it since yesterday, and I was thinking, let's talk about the Industrial Revolution
Okay.
in South Africa and where it came from.
Yes.
And then I would suggest that we look at the Industrial Revolution in the Vaal region, how it found its roots in the Vaal region, and that brings Emfuleni and the Vaal barrage into the picture. And then we will look at the rise of, for example, top location,
Okay.
Vereniging, the founding of Vereniging in the 1890s, and then also we'll be talking about what happened with how do you get migrant labor taking place
Yes.
and people coming to work in what is called the Vaal Triangle, and then how things changed as of the 1950s, and then, of course, the Sharpeville disaster of 1960. That's a seminal event, and also the subsequent 1980s unrest against the district municipalities by the apartheid government, and the way it spun off into the townships or the informal townships at Grasmere emerging. And
Okay.
then we will also touch on, I think, Everton. It's very important. And we spoke about Everton already, but I think it's an emblematic example. It's a very good example for us to try and understand in what direction we need to move. If you give people freehold ownership of property and you start giving them support to operate independently, and increasingly in the 20th century, the municipality of Meyerton and Henry on Klip, or those settlements, the white settlements, they were well disposed towards the residents of Everton. So there were very good bonds of collaboration.
Okay.
And I think that's a very good example of how you can integrate communities in a new South Africa. And what can we learn from Everton and what was done there? And I spoke to many of my students about Everton, and it has such a wonderful history. And how people stood together and how they lived together. But okay, we'll
Yes.
get into that. And then, of course, we touch on to Emfuleni and its emergence and its problems that arose.
Yes. Okay. It's quite a lot, but I think it's very important that we cover all of these things and we
Okay.
understand the history
Yes.
that led to us sitting
Yeah.
with what we are having today. I hope everything that we are going to discuss, it will be centered around the Vaal River.
Yes.
Because that's what
That's our objective.
Yes.
To get to understand it.
Yes.
And can you imagine people embarking on a love relationship with the river? And when I talk about that, I consider it embracing the river and everything it costs, and everything that it grants to us,
Yes.
what it provides us. Very few cities in Gauteng can boast a massive river of this kind. And
So
it's
true.
on our doorstep, and we continue to pollute it.
Yes.
And if we use people power, we can also get local industries to buy in. And we don't want to oppose them, we rely on them, but we need to develop a new frame of mind. And I think that's what the lady of Stonehaven can provide some information to you, how you get people to invest in the Vaal Triangle and help keep this environment, this ecosystem that we have at our disposal.
Yes. And build that tourism industry for
That's
the Vaal.
vitally important. And also the need for good coexistence, because many South Africans, black South Africans, are also buying properties on the river, and they're the Lani people. But
I'd like to buy one myself.
yes, okay. And you see, but how do we live together under those circumstances? Because I think there are a couple of places, visiting places. I don't want to call it a bar or anything like that, but people have a good time there. But after 11 o'clock on a Saturday evening, you don't want noise. You don't want the neighbors to complain about your noisy things going on, and especially the sound is carried by the water, the river. People don't like that, so they have to start living with each other, tolerating each other, and respecting each other.
Yes.
And that is what we have to do in civil society across the board. And if there's no such engagement, we're not going to make a success of South Africa.
True. So true. So true. Prof, let's start. We have a long journey.
Okay.
Industrial Revolution. Where do we start?
Right. The Industrial Revolution already started in the 1700s in the United Kingdom.
Okay.
Remember, the United Kingdom is basically an island kingdom. It's a small patch of land off the coast of Western Europe. And yet, by, let's say, the first half of the 20th century, actually up to the 1950s, the British Empire was said to have the status of an empire where the sun never sets.
Okay.
So as the sun moves around or the earth moves around the sun, in every 24 hours, there's no place where there is no subsidiary state or colony of the British Empire.
Okay. They were literally all over there.
Yes, all over the globe it's been there. And that started in the 1700s, basically in London, and then closer to the seaport areas where people started experimenting with using water, using coal, and generating steam power.
Okay.
And factories started operating. And these ships of the British Empire, they brought back spices and cottons from India and from China and from Southeast Asia, and also sugar from Central America, and I think spices, lots of spices. So it was a very, very, very nice wheel of fortune you started creating, and it was a very reliable system, because in New Zealand and Australia you had branches of this empire, and they provided red meat to the UK and very nice crops of fresh produce, and also valuable livestock remnants, as well as wool that was required for industries in the United Kingdom. Now, South Africa's industrial revolution started in the port cities of Durban, Port Elizabeth, and also Cape Town.
Okay.
And you found that what happened was the 1820 settlers arrived at Port Elizabeth. They ventured into the interior. At the time, that was in the 1820s, and at the time, the frontier farmers, the Dutch-speaking frontier farmers, started moving away from the eastern frontier of the Xhosas and the Zulus, and they moved into the interior and moved forwards. And that was the Great Track, basically from 1838.
Okay.
And at the same time, industries started flourishing in the Eastern Cape. Better communication routes were established, and greater discipline was established by British troops on the frontiers so that there were not so many conflicts. And the British colonial authority was fairly well disposed towards the indigenous communities, respecting their traditions and allowing them to develop and not overpowering them, as would have been the case in many colonial states, such as those of the Portuguese and the French, and also the Germans to a large extent. So Britain went about in a different way of engaging with the people, and that paved the way for a rural industrial development, farmers producing more maize and wheat and wool that was produced for the British market, and it was exported from Port Elizabeth as well as Durban, sugarcane as well, sugar, and from Cape Town. So you had this.
Yeah, sorry, Prof. I just want to clarify something. Between the Dutch and the British, who came first to South Africa?
The Dutch came.
The Dutch came
but
first.
The Dutch, we speak of the Dutch alone, but as I explained to you last time, the French, there were French Huguenots in South Africa. There were also people, ordinary people of Germany, soldiers who came from the war in Crimea. As of the 1850s, they also moved into South Africa, and they were brought in. The surplus people of Europe who could not find jobs tended to come to the Cape. And before 1895, they would have engaged with the Dutch colonial authorities, and they would be granted lands, and they would start producing wine and also fresh produce, export produce, hunting produce, etc. So these were goods and services that were required at the Cape. But then the frontier farmers, the Dutch frontier farmers moving into the interior, they could not tolerate the British emancipation of the slaves. The British really went to war against slavery after the late 18th century unrest in Central America, in Haiti especially. And then it was the Christian ladies in the United Kingdom who propagated the freedom of the slaves. And that was also when the missionary societies started moving, British missionary societies moving into the Cape and also expanding it upright into the arid central parts of southern Africa. Now, along with this process, you constantly had traders moving into the interior, hunting wild animals, securing skins, hides, ivory, and hunting meat and trophies, etc. It was also an adventurous location for foreign hunters to come to South Africa and shoot out the wildlife. So it was a market that was opening up. And as this opened up, more things started improving. For example, the equivalent of today's Wi-Fi came into the interior in about the 1870s.
Okay.
And that was the telegram service, a telegraph system that emerged. So you had communications, and if you are an avid newspaper reader in the 19th century, you would basically wait 2 to 3 months before your
receive.
newspaper reached you in Vereniging or let's say Heidelberg or Potchefstroom. So it took a long time for information to reach the interior. But the colonial government of Britain in the Cape was very well connected with the United Kingdom, the colonial officers of the United Kingdom. So they had a major advance, and that brought a lot of progress because, for example, merino sheep were very much in demand as of the 1840s in the interior of South Africa. And by the 1850s, the export of merino wool was the greatest source of revenue in the Cape Colony.
Okay.
So then you find in the 1860s, all of a sudden, this Kimberley emerges, and it becomes this mecca for adventurers moving into a rapid get-rich-quick environment on the diamond fields, not far from the Vaal River, in fairly close proximity to the Vaal River, but it was a very water-stressed community in which they operated. And that was from basically 1865 up to more or less, let's say, 1880, 81. And then all of a sudden, there was this discovery by the Struben brothers of gold on the Witwatersrand Highveld.
Okay.
And that attracted people like Cecil John Rhodes and Sammy Marks. He was a Jewish businessman of note who had very good relations with the Republic of the Transvaal and President Paul Kruger. And it was because of these good offices between him and Paul Kruger that the railway line from the Cape crossed at what is today Vereniging. And also that was where the town of Vereniging was established already in 1890.
Okay. The Struben brothers.
Yes.
What year approximately do they discover the gold?
Yeah, it's difficult. People say that the first discoveries were made in 1865, 1860. I think even before the time there were certain people moving into the interior looking for minerals. So let's say in the case of the coal deposits in the Vaal Triangle, people in Kimberley already knew about that, and they wanted to get coal from this region with the permission of the Free State government to export it to the diamond fields, but it didn't ever operate properly because you had too much timber, raw timber coming in, and it was a quick burn operation. And also they tried even at one stage to build a raft or a boat to take coal down and produce fresh produce for the people on the Kimberley diamond fields. But it didn't want to work because the level of the river wasn't always deep enough to have a float or a raft going down the river. And so automatically Sammy Marks was aware of the coal discoveries on the Free State side of the border.
Okay.
And once they started with gold mining on the Witwatersrand, besides gold, they also sought coal. they had not yet excavated territories for mining coal. So consequently, the region on the Free State side was very handy for taking some coal upstream. But the other advantage we had in this region was that you had the Vaal River flowing close to the banks of what was to become Vereniging. And Sammy Marks also had a massive farming operation where he had migrant labourers and what they called people who lived on Sammy Marks's properties, and they produced for him crops that were shared in half. They took half, and Sammy Marks would take the other half.
Okay.
So that was one way of getting this industrial economy on the run, on the Witwatersrand, as well as locally. And then,
so the Witwatersrand discovery of gold happened more or less about the same time as the discovery of coal in the Vaal region, or it was later. Coal came a bit later.
no, key capitalists were aware of the coal deposits here, and also geologists were aware of that. And of course, once they started engaging, once the business people and the geologists got together, they said, oh, this is viable and we can opt for that because they have a need for water supplies, they have a need for coal supplies, and we can start providing them with this resource, as well as fresh produce from here, and even your lekker nice gin and whiskey and stuff that was done close to Pretoria, on the eastern side of Pretoria. So also the beer breweries in Johannesburg became very important, and they all required very good water.
Okay.
And the water supplies that Johannesburg had, many of the rivers and streams became contaminated, so they could not readily use that water because you had the Amawasha people in parts of the Top Klipspruit doing washing for people in Johannesburg city. So, and also you had dirty mine water already flowing into the Klip River, for example, into the Vaal River, and that was not tolerable because the farmers' livestock relied on that water in the Klip River, for example. So it started becoming a compounded problem, so that by the onset of a new South Africa, after the Anglo-Boer War, the South African War between 1899 and 1902, the British authorities who had taken over the Transvaal Republic, they said, well, let's give attention to the establishment of, for example, a water board, as you have in the United Kingdom. So where do we get our water from? First, they looked at subterranean water resources, and they pumped water from fountains and streams that were known to be fairly clean. But increasingly the more mines on the Witwatersrand required more water, and they also required more coal to keep their operations on the go. So this industrial revolution set off at a dynamic pace because take it between 1880, let's say 1880 and 1920, you passed through the South African War and you passed through the First World War from 1914 to 1918, and then in the post-war era, you find that the early industries were given attention of providing energy, electricity, and that required coal, and that's where the origins of ISCO and the ESCOM were seated in, with the state subsidizing these operations, vast industrial complexes, to provide water and also to provide coal energy to the Witwatersrand, because this was the massive mining house of southern Africa. And that gives you an idea of the crucial role that the Vaal Triangle played. And remember, from here right up to, let's say, the Klip River, on the edge of where the end of Lesedi district today, you had fresh produce farmers, you had, for example, maize and wheat and other produce produced for the people, the consumers in the cities of the Witwatersrand that emerged as of 1902. And you had typical British municipal administrations coming into existence, and they were uniform. What is important is the Chamber of Mines was a very interesting institution, because that was an institution that secured migrant labor for the mines, people coming from Mozambique, people coming from what is today Zimbabwe, some from Botswana, and some even further up in southern Africa. And you had these people coming in, staying here for a while, say 6 months, and then they would go back home. And then in 2 years' time, they would come back, or maybe less than 2 years' time. So you had migrants from elsewhere, and many of those people stayed behind on the Witwatersrand. And if you come in as a person who was raised by the missionaries somewhere in southern Africa, you would be able to communicate with the Europeans, and you would start doing housework for them. You would start looking for a job at a retail business, or you would start looking for a job at the mines, a more permanent job at the mines. And many Africans were also creative. They were very productive. They started their own shebeens. They started their own businesses. And in that way, they started generating an authority over their own capital. And that is how the system of capitalism started taking root in South Africa. And it took several generations to help these people to rise to the top.
So why is it that they needed to go as far as Zimbabwe and Mozambique to get migrant labor? Because I would imagine there's closer areas or regions that they could have approached.
Well, the British companies had good relations with the Portuguese. And the Portuguese Empire was already in a phase of demise by the 1900s. And for all the migrants they sent to the mines here, they were indirectly, in later years as well, especially, they were financed by the mining houses, who gave the Portuguese government, for example, some payments for having the service at their disposal, to bring in miners to work for 6 months and then leave, and then return later on. Because increasingly many Black South Africans, especially in the rural areas, they chose to stay with their families. And only when, for example, during the Depression of 1917 to say 1920, and then again in 1930 to 1933, these worldwide depressions brought everything literally to a standstill. And many of your indigenous people in, say, for example, the Ciskei and KwaZulu-Natal or KwaZulu, they would many of them would have chosen to stay away. And even here on the Highveld, when they built the barrage, for example, in the 1910s, whenever there was floods or when there was a drought situation, construction work on the barrage would come to a halt, and the farmers would go to their families, to their communities, and they would work there for a while, and then they would return. At the time of the Rand Revolution, where communists and the Afrikaner workers stood together against the British capitalists. Also here you found that the Africans working, for example, on the dam and local construction works for, say, for example, the Rand Water Board. As soon as the trouble started, they headed home. And once that subsided, they moved back. So you had this migrant tendency all along. And those people were the spearhead of urban settlements. And that is how top location in Vereniging took shape. And among the residents of top location or in neighboring settlements were the Indian people who came in with the British. And they were magnificent traders. You still have their descendants operating many wonderful shops in Vereniging today. Okay. So it's a long tradition. But these are all spin-offs of the Industrial Revolution that started in the United Kingdom. Now, what's interesting is I said that the Industrial Revolution started about in between 1725 and 1750. By the late 1890s, the Germans latched onto it. And also the Americans latched onto it. And then by the end of the 19th century, the British were threatened by this upcoming United States of America, that they lost the war against the first major war, and the Americans were rapidly catching up on them, but also the Germans. But more important than that was, ever since the 1850s, the British had started working on sanitation systems in London and large cities like Manchester and the like. So you had the event of the Broad Street pump, where in the early, let's say, pre-1850, there was this Broad Street pump in London where people collected the most fantastic pure water, groundwater supplies. And then all of a sudden, people started developing water-related diseases.
Okay.
And then some lawyers and engineers started talking about this, and then they realized it was the Broad Street pump. Because what had happened was the houses of people in London were constructed with your basement section, basically carrying all your raw wastewater, the sewage, etc. And those stocks, once they started filling up, it started contaminating the groundwater. And it immediately hygienic measures were introduced in London to address this crisis. And similarly, at the same time, Paris had already started addressing the issue of sewers, having long tunnels under the city of Paris, carrying water out of the city into the rural areas. So what happened was the British and the English came together, and they started managing this system of dealing with wastewater and sanitation. And the British example was emulated in the United States of America as well as in Germany. In Hamburg, for example, they emulated what had been going on. And they basically improved on that, especially in terms of urban planning in these areas. So those were breakthrough events. And one of the reasons, maybe there's something for us to learn from this. When the Thames River, and you know the House of Lords and the House of Commons is on the banks of the Thames in London.
Okay.
We had the big stink in the 1850s, so that these politicians could not continue talking and deliberating on the issues of the country in peace. And they vacated their premises. And that was when the politicians started taking note of the need for providing good sanitation services, infrastructure systems. So maybe that was a good example. We should try and explore that further if we want to deal with South Africa's water problems. But
Okay.
so it shows you these examples were taken up by countries in Europe, and they were also taken up in the New World by the United States. Importantly, in South Africa, we emulated the British system, establishing municipal government in the Cape. We find that as of the 1830s, 1840s, you had municipal governments emerging. And in the republics of the Free State and the Transvaal, it was Republican rule, but the municipal government wasn't as efficient. So after the Anglo-Boer War or the South African War in 1899-1902, you find that these municipal governments came into place, and they also took over the management of your wastewater systems over a period of time.
Okay.
So, and simultaneously, you had many British engineers as well as American engineers coming to South Africa and helping these municipalities develop their water systems to the benefit of the population. And that worked very well. And as South Africa's universities started producing its engineers, and water specialists, water scientists, you find that we developed some homegrown strategies for dealing with water. But for example, the Department of what we call Water and Sanitation today was called in 1913 the Department of Irrigation. That was their priority. They had to provide the farmers with water, and the municipalities were left to their own devices. But as the provincial government started flourishing and getting up to their feet, you find that in all the provinces of South Africa, a uniform system of municipal government, of water and sanitation emerged. Now, on the Witwatersrand, we had the benefit of the Rand Water Board, established with the support of the merchant mines of gold mines of the Witwatersrand. They managed to be fairly autonomous, and they could provide a fantastic service, especially to the private sector. That was their prime customers. And then the urban areas developed by these customers of theirs, and Springs, Benoni, Brakpan, Roodepoort, Randfontein, etc. So it was government in collaboration with capital operating in this way, finding it beneficial to start urban areas. And in that process, this Rand Water Board that primarily serviced the mines at first became a major water supplier in or let's say the Transvaal province.
Okay. Sorry, when was the first water board founded? Around 1930s or earlier?
Well, Rand Water Board was established more or less in 1903.
Okay.
And that was actually, I would say, a benchmark for a good municipal water supply to municipal authorities. They didn't have the services readily available of engineers to take charge of these plants. By the 1930s, it was very common for municipalities to have their municipal engineers in charge of water, sanitation, road construction, electricity, and the likes. So you develop that, and in 1994, just to give you an example how municipal engineering developed, engineers have told me that the city of Johannesburg's engineering department was capable of running any municipality in Africa in terms of dealing with their critical issues. And now I'm talking about drainage, town layout, town planning, providing electricity, providing water, providing sanitation. That came along with the wealth created in the province and in many of the other provinces, but especially in the 1930s, you had the emergence of very sophisticated wastewater treatment water services, up to the minute fashions in sanitary systems that came from Britain into South Africa, and here it was applied. And it started working to great effect on the Witwatersrand. But constantly you had a very responsible, well-run municipality at the heart of everything. In the smallest towns, where you had a municipal authority, you had this system. And when it came to local elections, the first thing you would try, and if you are a resident, you join up with the Ratepayers Association. The Ratepayers Association is not a political party.
Okay.
It was the Nats and the United Party people working together. And they would take on their councillors, and they would take on municipal managers and officials if they did wrong. And of course, the ruling party in the council would call the shots, and they would say, "This is what we want to have." So it's more a local thing, and it worked very well. It worked exceedingly well. I was born in Benoni, and I grew up there. On our block, I seldom found at night that the lights were out. Or if there was a light out, there would be a phone call to the town electrician, and within 24 hours, even less than that, that light will be replaced. And the same went for water supplies and sanitation services. So it was more a localized system of governance that emerged. But there was consensus because the provincial council, for say example, Transvaal or the Free State or Natal or the Western Cape, they would have policies siphoning into local government that would be to the benefit of them, because the government, national government, would allocate funds to all the provinces, and from there the money would run down to the municipalities.
Okay.
So the municipalities were also responsible for their revenue systems. So they had to make sure that they had to give good services, and their jobs hanged on the good service they were providing.
So what I'm finding from you, Prof, is that the early municipalities had capacity in terms of skill.
Yes.
And it was internal.
Yeah.
There was a good collaboration between governments and I don't want to say civic organizations, let's say external stakeholders.
Yeah, between the political parties. And I think you would have had more of the political issues discussed at the provincial government. But the local government focused on local things.
Okay.
And you and I, as residents of Van der Bijl Park, could have gone to the municipal offices and say, "Look, my sidewalk hasn't been the grass hasn't been cut. Why didn't you remove the waste?" And that was very bad, because municipalities didn't like it. They were in competition with each other at the regional level at the provincial level and at the national level. What is today Emfuleni had the municipalities of Van der Bijlpark and Vereniging. And Van der Bijlpark on several occasions was one of the best kept municipalities in the whole South Africa.
Okay.
And the same goes for Sasolburg, exactly the same. So you had competition and politics, local politicians operating at the local level. And it's here where you address the issues, the critical issues you experienced. Now, how did they afford this? For example, Rand Water coming down to Vereniging enabled Vereniging to bring more people to work here, earning better incomes, and they contributed technologically and also in terms of capital in the municipality of Vereniging. And very much the same happened, for example, in Johannesburg, where the mining houses and the massive business corporations starting up, how they nurtured these operations. So it's a local thing that spreads. And once you build up that local patriotism, that nationalism, you like your town because it's nicer than Meyerton or Henry on Klip or Springs or Randfontein or whatever. So there was this, it was a status thing. And when the state started Eskom, for example, in the 1920s, and also later ISCO, these were massive industrial operations that brought job opportunities for local residents, and they also could dispose of their services to people elsewhere in Gauteng or let's say Transvaal. And nowadays we are even providing water from Rand Water to Rustenburg. So it's a very expanded project, because Rand Water is without a doubt the largest water supplier, potable water supplier in Africa. It's a prime producer of water, and it's a well-managed company. So it has a long track record. And remember now, the other thing is these mines operating here, flourishing. By the 1970s, we reached peak gold. And then after that, our gold supplies started diminishing. We didn't mine enough. But we also provided uranium from these mining operations. And of course, the atomic bomb that was released on Fukushima in Japan, that uranium came from South Africa. Or much of that uranium came from South Africa, because the substance of that uranium was required for the optimal production of the nuclear power for the bomb. So it was an enmeshed system. And this industrial revolution of ours relied on mining, extensively on mining. And more people started moving into the cities as of the 1950s. And it was not just the black people. It was also the white people, poor whites, as I told you previously, from the rural areas of South Africa. Large families said, no, we can't afford you. You have to go and look for a job on the Witwatersrand. And that is how people started moving into these areas. A very exemplary system, and we discussed it last week. I'm just singling out Everton. Everton was a freehold place. The property belonged to a single property owner who managed to secure the rights to sell plots of land to people of color. And it was basically a Western-styled system. And then the American missionaries also moved into Everton.
What year is this approximately?
Well, it already emerged in the 1890s, and it started taking on shape in the early 1900s. And at the time of unification, there was agreement that Everton, and what is the township there close to northern Johannesburg?
Orange Farm?
No, not Orange Farm.
Alexandra.
Alexandria.
Yes.
That was another freehold system that was developed on similar grounds. But
Okay.
the magic of Everton was that it was semi-rural, and it was in close proximity to white farmers and also small urban settlements. And there were very good relations. And the ownership of those properties were exemplary in the sense that people claimed ownership. And for example, the man would go and work at one of the local mines or in one of the local industries, and his wife or wives would look after the crops they have on the land. So there was this system of exchange going on, and you had very progressive thinkers in the system. You had American missionaries operating in the area, and they, within the tradition of Christianity, helped these people become familiar with Western traditions. And that actually gave rise to a very important community in South Africa, which I think is still nurtured in many quarters by people involved that were involved in the struggle, and also in engaging on the creation of a new South Africa. So there were good relationships across racial lines, especially in Everton, and
Okay.
also the urban African identity started emerging from here. Also, the southwestern townships, Soweto, started emerging in the 20th century, but I don't think it had the same type of incubation experience that the people had in Everton.
In Everton. Okay. And Alex.
And Alex as well.
When does people go and settle in top location? I would have thought top location came before Everton, but it sounds
Yes,
like...
it did. It
Okay.
actually did. And remember, when I speak about the 1890s, in the case of Everton, it was rural opportunities that were sought. In the
Okay.
case of top location, it was job opportunities, especially after 1910, 1914, when they started the iron and steel factory in Vereniging, and they needed laborers, and also the coal mines. The
Okay.
coal mines emerging, and obviously also Rand Water, the Rand Water Board. So as these industries started establishing, you found people coming in from Lesotho and probably Zululand as well, and the Ciskei, and seeking opportunities here to work as migrant laborers. But that they were primarily internal migrants. And what is today Lesotho or Basotholand in that time was a protectorate. It became, by the 1950s, it was a protectorate of the United Kingdom, as was the case with Botswana. So the British still held an influence there, but they allowed these states to flourish on their own. But that was once the decolonization started in the 1950s
Okay.
in Africa. But before the time, in the first half of the 20th century, many people from Basotholand came to this region, and also to the Witwatersrand, where they flourished. So those were typical examples of how the Industrial Revolution played out. ISCO, a massive industrial operation, often functioning at a loss, providing iron and steel for the industries in South Africa, making the country go ahead, building railroads, providing the equipment for railroad construction. So these were strategic operations. And then after World War II, you find the Sasolburg emerging. Energy, coal, inferior coal was used to start up the processing of coal into energy for vehicles.
Okay.
And also, obviously, for other purposes, chemistry purposes, fertilizers emerging from this industry on the other side of the river. So the Vaal Triangle was actually a feeding ground of raw materials to the Witwatersrand industries.
Why is it that the ArcelorMittal was, or then ISCO, let's talk about ISCO.
Yeah.
Why is it that it was positioned where it was? Is there any relation to ArcelorMittal, to the river, Sasol and the river? I'm just trying to understand, does it have to do anything with that? Or is the coal deposit in Vereeniging that?
Okay, just to give you an answer on that, we can also bring in Eskom.
Okay, yes.
When Sammy Marks marketed his Riviera in Vereeniging to the people of Johannesburg to visit over the weekends or for summer holidays, he said the water of the Vaal River is warm. And you know where that water came from? From the power stations. You understand?
Okay.
So this was like a hot water area in the minds of people. I don't know what it did to the ecosystem, but I think it thoroughly changed a lot of those things. That's one thing. And remember, to operate a steel plant, you need lots of water. So it was strategic positioning, putting the ISCO plant on the banks of the Vaal River and in close proximity of the future power stations or the existing power stations, and it was hunky-dory. And the same went for Sasol, which was an even more strategic agency, because we didn't have sufficient oil deposits to power our vehicles, etc. So Sasol's operations provided opportunities for us to produce liquid gases and also liquid fuels and fertilizers and the like.
Okay. I want us to touch on two things that you spoke about earlier. I just want a bit more detail on them. The first one is Semimax. Please talk a bit about who Semimax was. And then the second one is the issue of the Vaal River that had low levels.
Yes.
What changed that? Because the Vaal River, as we know it today, it's different from what you have described. I cannot cross over the river with an ox wagon today.
It's a very good and sensible question. And when you go to the Stonehaven, you obviously see a photograph of the shallow Vaal River passing by Stonehaven.
Okay.
So the river was shallow. In the dry season, you could cross it with comfort. And there were drifts that they passed through all along the Vaal River. And it was only once they constructed the Vaal Barrage, the Rand Water Board Barrage, that the water was dammed up. And then it was dammed up even more once they started constructing the Vaal Dam in the 1930s.
Okay.
And that became the major storage of water in the eastern parts of the Transvaal province and on the border of the Natal province and the Free State province. Does that answer that question?
Yes. No,
the other
does.
one was
Semimax.
Semimax.
Who is Semimax? And
Yeah, Sammy Marks, he was a Jewish entrepreneur who was very well disposed towards the government of President Paul Kruger. And whilst the British adventurers and businesses that came to the Witwatersrand were interested in overthrowing the government of Paul Kruger, Sammy Marks was neutral.
Okay.
And he became a confidant of Paul Kruger because obviously he was a Jewish religious person. He was well disposed towards his religion, and Paul Kruger was also a very religious person. So Paul Kruger was said to have told Sammy Marks, Sammy, we are better than you. And then Sammy would ask him why, and he said, well, you see, you only use one part of the Bible, and we use the whole Bible, so we know more about this. But both of them were fairly well, especially Paul Kruger was very religious, and he got along very well with Sammy Marks because Sammy Marks respected him and the objectives that Paul Kruger had for the Transvaal Republic. He didn't want it to be taken over by the British, while the landlords who were digging for gold on the Witwatersrand were very eager for Her Majesty's government to take control of the Transvaal. So I hope that shows something to you, but also Sammy Marks made a major contribution towards the development of what is today or what was Vereniging. He saw to it that the railway line crossed at Vereniging from the Cape, and also he ensured that industries were developed. He had major farming operations here, and he boosted the economy of Vereniging, and that paved the way for this industrial area to develop. And you find that many electrical products in the 1940s and 1950s started coming off the mill in the Vereniging region, as well as the iron and steel industry, because the first proper iron and steel factory was in Vereniging. And if you have time, I'll take you out there in Vereniging. We still have remnants of that old factory operating there.
What year was it?
That was in 1914. Earlier, in the 1850s, they tried without success to do the same in Pietermaritzburg, but it wasn't a success. And then, because we had water and coal in supply, an abundant supply, that was why the Vereniging Refractory started working here.
Okay.
And it became a very comprehensive operation.
And what type of furnaces were they using?
Well, rudimentary iron furnaces. And I think they were probably coal-fired. Without a doubt, they wouldn't have been electrically powered before, I would say, the 1930s, deep 1930s, once our mines locally were in a position to provide lots of energy.
Okay. Let's talk about the faith. I know we're still in the industrial development of the Vaal, but I want us to touch on the faith that these people had, especially in connection to the river. Is there anything that you want to mention? Somebody said I must ask you a question about that. Especially the earlier settlers in the...
Yeah. Well, I think Samson Mokoena did very good work at Veja.
Okay.
When he explored with his fellow people in the NGO how the local people in, let's say, what is today Vanderbijlpark region, how they worshipped their ancestors in close proximity to the water. And even today you have baptisms taking place, but it has become so polluted you can't try to venture in that direction, because you will be poisoning people if you have a baptismal service, you understand?
Yes.
And in the Klip River already we have evidence of that in the 1990s and the early 2000s. They became aware of these rituals that were conducted, extending over long periods of times, often more than 50 years, that you had these rituals and you had preachers that were living along the river, and the water became contaminated until NGOs stepped in and the health authority stepped in to guide people not to use the river. So that was very important. And also, which brings us, you asked me about top location.
Yes.
And the Domu Dam. Sharpeville was established in 1947 as a model location.
Okay.
And the residents of top location were literally, many of them were forced into moving to Sharpeville. And then once the people started settling in Sharpeville, they said, okay, we'll accept this. But we will also take note of the Dlomu Dam. And it was said that they respected their ancestral spirits, and therefore they asked the children not to go too close to the edge of the Dlomu Dam. Now, the whole thing was that increasingly after the 1960s, as of the 1960s, as they increasingly upgraded Sharpeville with showers and water and sanitation to domestic areas, that dam started filling up with debris of wastewater resources flowing into the dam, and that was not good for the dam. So it was not advised for people to make use of the dam facility, which was basically what we would call a wetland situation that you had. And we know wetlands operate very well. But if they are smothered with too much water and wastewater that's overpowering, it is not good for the human condition to absorb some of that water. So that is the symbolic linkage between Sharpeville and the Dlomu Dam.
Okay. How did the Dlomu Dam develop? Was it a wetland that
yes, it was,
became bigger as a result of water flooding into flowing into it?
It was the case, but even today, it would have been definitely more of a wetland, and they would have lifted the walls of this dam, obviously, as more sewage flowed into the dam. But in the early days, I would think that you would have had a massive wetland area, and that would have been grazed by livestock. And the best example you find of Lesotho-styled livestock farming is if you go on the road from Van der Bijl Park to Vereniging, you see those herds of cattle. That is an old tradition that's been here. Once the Lesotho people settled in the area, they brought in their cattle, and they have their herders. And it's this is little Lesotho that we have here in this area.
That has existed for years.
Yes.
When I heard Mama Khotsi, who is the former speaker of CuDyWat, she had mentioned that her father-in-law was also a resident at top location. And she says her father-in-law, until he died, he complained about how he missed his the type of life that they had in top location.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the people in Sharpeville accepted that, and I'm just thinking about that story of someone who really was dissatisfied about him having to move to Bophelong. What was the arrangement in top location, and how did it change when people moved to the likes of Sharpeville and Bophelong?
Now, as of 1910, increasingly the municipal authorities took responsible for dealing with the black people in a location. It was not very well managed, but they had access to fairly good water resources. There were hand pumps.
Okay.
And they also the authorities tried to maintain some sanitary services over the years, but it was a rudimentary township that was laid out, and it was spontaneously developed. It had an organic growth, very much like an informal settlement. But on the one side, you had the large industries supporting these people, these residents. They didn't really give them a lot of money, but they helped them with some of the infrastructure systems. But then you had a very specific identity emerging, because it wasn't just black people. There were also people of color, colored people, and also people of Indian descent. It was a cosmopolitan township.
Okay.
And with the development of Sharpeville, all the ethnic groups that were ordered into very specific areas, as was the case similarly in Vanderbijlpark, when they started with Iscor's township development for its black people. So you had the apartheid ideology as of 1948 being stamped down on these people. And I think that was where the discontent started taking place. Even if they had the luxury of a cinema, even if they had the luxury of shops, they didn't, and properly constructed houses, but they didn't have that freedom to reshape the places where they were living. And I think that was maybe, it was very far from a model location system we had, because the freedom of the people was not respected. Whereas in top location, I think that is what kept that community together. And it's just a remarkable vibe that prevailed there. And I don't know why they haven't started developing it as a modern, state-of-the-art urban development, upper class development.
Yeah.
But it has a lot of culture. That's a specific site, and you know where it is. It is where the Vaal Technorama is situated.
I have heard, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I've pulled you in so many directions. Now I am trying to get us back on course again so that we can get to the end. We've spoken about the labor migrants that moved into the area as a result of economic development. We've spoken a bit about Sharpeville and its development, top location. I don't know where you want us to go. Do you think we've covered Sharpeville sufficiently?
Well, I think Sharpeville is definitely an iconic space, cultural space, because it was, when they speak about the cradle of humankind, the cradle of human rights.
Okay.
When they speak about that, I think that hits the nail on the head. Because in 1960, as the rest of Africa became independent, or large parts of Africa became independent, in South Africa, the black people didn't have the same sense of equality and human respect for their human rights. And that is where the struggle against the National Party rule in the country, the apartheid rule, apartheid regime, that's where it had its origins. And it was fed, it became a symbol, and it paved the way half a generation later in 1975 with the Soweto uprising. Okay. So you find these traces of, let's say, a genealogy of evolution of the liberation struggle.
Okay, all right. The 1980 unrest, I think we've touched a little bit on that. I don't know if you want to touch some more. I'm going back to the topics that you wanted us to cover.
Yeah, it is, what's important about 1980-84 is that the apartheid government wanted to create regional municipal services.
Okay.
And they wanted to bring in the townships like Everton and Sharpeville, and also here in what is today Sebokeng, Rietspruit area. They wanted to bring these areas in as local municipalities. And then collectively on a regional level, they would engage with the Indian township close to Vuyani, and also local townships where it was viable to establish local municipal authorities. And that was not in the favor of the protesters, the ANC in disguise, by 1984, because they thought it was a partial democracy. There was still seclusion. They were not part of the Parliament of South Africa. And they did not agree with that arrangement. And the outcome of that was that the government sort of let it go in the later part of the 1980s. And what happened at that stage was a lot of people had started moving from the rural areas of the Free State, the Transvaal, and Lesotho into the southern parts of Gauteng, what is today Gauteng. And the objective was to find a place to live, first of all, and then to work in the city. And it started this migration, massive migration to the urban areas. And that is, for example, how informal settlements were formed. Increasingly, in the apartheid era, that was a no-go. You don't have an informal settlement at established locations. Not even in Soweto. That was all done by the book as far as the government was concerned. So this invasion of people from the rural areas caused for a population growth and less job opportunities and a very a dicey capitalist situation where capitalism wasn't completely in control, and they were afraid of what happens if the state collapses. So that many of the companies like Anglo-American, for example, and many iron steel operations, other related industries, they started under-investing locally. And because for fear that there would come a change of government.
Okay.
And the fear of a non-peaceful transition to a new South Africa was nipped in the bud when in the mid-1980s South African academics and many of the business people started engaging with the ANC in exile, preparing the way for a new South Africa, finding a solution to the issues. And by 1990, with the release of Nelson Mandela, that sort of started smoothing out. And the way was paved for the establishment of a non-racial South Africa where the black people had their human rights protected, and they were granted the promise of water and good housing in terms of the RDP program. So those were objectives, and initially it started off as a massive success, but the inflow of people continued to the extent that by 1996 already you had the onset of poverty in many parts of South Africa, and the Vaal Triangle was an example of that situation that had emerged. And also on the other side of the river, it started becoming a problem because you couldn't accommodate that much people in an industrial town like Sasolburg and an industrial city complex like Vereniging and Van der Bijl Park. It was very difficult because people working in Johannesburg could only stay here. There was nothing for them to go to in Soweto because it also there they had the problem, and that is when these informal settlements started emerging on the Highveld.
Okay, so essentially the population and household growth became faster than the economic development of the area. Yeah. But what stalled the economic growth in the 80s was companies fearing that there's going to be a change of government.
Violent overthrow.
Sure. Yeah. And that essentially triggered a chain of events that led to the region becoming...
Yeah. But you see, it could have gone worse. You could have had the situation like you had in Northwest Province, where the Afrikaner right wing went to war against the government of the day, and they were killed on the streets of the homeland. And that was a symptom of the need for South Africans to rethink their own position in this country. Are we going to collaborate, or are we going to expand further? Are we going to build a sensible democracy for everybody and start moving beyond the confines of race and class and stuff like that? And I think it's still a project under construction because we haven't sensibly contemplated how to use capitalism and how to use socialism for the benefit of society. We still have a lot of greed on the edges. And when I speak about greed, on the one hand, it is capital, and on the other hand, it's culture, because people still cling to certain cultural rights, and other people cling to material assets and capital assets. And between that, we have to find a midway where you can start growing the seeds of tolerance, mutual tolerance for each other, and mutual respect for each other. But even more than that, finding that the local authority where we live listens to us, takes note of us, and what our aspirations are, and how we can collaborate collectively in making a the suburb or the place where we reside a success. But this is, it's very idealistic, and I think it's very difficult. So you will, in future, I think, need very specific diplomats coming to the fore, community diplomats conveying a message like you do, to try and convince people to start thinking sensibly. What route do we have? I mean, our unemployment rate is very high, and we need to address that. And we need to find opportunities for all that is of a much higher standard than what we are used to at present. So it starts with a clean municipal government that does not go for corruption, where officials can be trusted, and where instead of committing themselves to corruption, start working on getting things operational and working in the interest of you and myself.
Would you say, Prof, the approach that the apartheid government had was actually a better system? An example would be, you mentioned that ArcelorMittal would be run at a loss, but the mandate was always to develop the country. And when you look at it today, it's a private business, and the mandate has probably changed. Would you say that is something that we've drifted away from by, internationalizing and globalizing most of these industries that we are now sitting with?
Okay.
And also, I just want to add on something. From what I could understand from you then, there was a lot of collaboration between government, private business or capital, and today, I want to just pick your mind. Would you say we have drifted away from that? Business tends to shy away from getting involved in issues of government than they did in the past.
Yeah. Okay. Now, just to inform you on this thing about the National Party, I grew up in a house where the National Party was respected. Well, my father was a nationalist and my mother was a United Party supporter. So I was pretty confused. But I was, in my way, when I was at university, I was a bit of an activist, going against the stream. But yes, when, let's go back to 1934, when they started the United Party under Smuts, and the National Party collaborated with him up to 1939. The one was extremely right-wing, they fancied the Germans, and the other was favored the Allies. But you had a way of conducting politics in a colonial, semi-colonial style that was conducive to stimulating the economy. And then after the Second World War, the war lasted from 1939 to 1945. After the war, that support of the government diminished because they came out of a war. And the National Party managed to gain the upper hand. And the National Party, whose major support lay in the Cape, wanted apartheid to rule the roost. They were quite comfortable with the coloureds. They could deal with them, and the number of blacks from the Eastern Cape in the Cape Colony, that Cape Province, that was satisfactory to them. But then it became more complex in the interior of South Africa, selling this apartheid thing. And then they started homelands in terms of Verwoerd's ideas. So that was, let's say, a balkanization of the country, trying to restore things to ethnic identities and trying to start independent states. That couldn't work. That couldn't operate. And by the 1980s, the apartheid system was really exhausted. And you find that, especially on the Rand and the Vaal Triangle, as I told you, the 1980s, the unrest of the 1980s had its roots here in the Vaal Triangle because people were under very good, or they were well informed on the dire circumstances they would face if they had to go into an agreement with the government of the day, the white-controlled government of the day. So that persistence prevailed, and I think it smoothened it out, and it conveyed a message throughout the region as well as in other parts of South Africa. So the national parties, there's a very important lesson. A party in South Africa doesn't have a longer lifetime than between 30 and 40 years.
Okay.
The National Party came into power in 1948. The National Party drifted out of power in 1991. So what does that tell you? For 30 years, they were very comfortable. They could change a lot of things. But in the last decade, before 1994, they really made a hell of a mess of things by not committing to more tolerance and addressing complaints and problems of people in a proper way. So that when the ANC came to power, it was a lot of activists, very well disposed activists who took control of government, but they needed to be bolstered by the former ruling government, which petered out in 1996. They left the government of national unity. So the National Party actually became a zero on a contract. And that was leaving a lot of South Africans behind. And then you had the Afrikaner right wing emerging, strident with many of the laws of the day and the agreements of the day. And in this system, in the middle point, at the point of gravity, you had the business sector telling both sides, look, we want promising South Africa, we want free enterprise to remain firmly in place and not be threatened. Otherwise, we will leave the country. And that was, I think, a watershed. And what happened was many leading people of the current government were sponsored from outside, from overseas, with capital and moral support, especially on the side of labor, etc. So there was a lot of support on that side, but also that diminished gradually over extended periods of time. And you find that in many respects, the South African government started joining up with BRICS, and the balance of power, the global balance of power, started shifting away. And you have a robust competition at present between the West, Western Europe, the United States, and also China and its neighboring states, probably taking a very strong stand in the form of BRICS, saying, we want something else to take place. We want a different change. We're still prepared to invest in this, but we want a better deal. And therefore, it requires of our politicians to be more aware of what happens in the United States and in Western Europe, and also in China and India and up upcoming states of the global south. That needs to be addressed in a very firm way. And at the crux of that is the need for new technologies, modern technologies, new innovations that we can primarily rely on from China, as well as the USA and Western Europe. But we have to become that point where South Africa, who has a strategic position at the southern tip of Africa, to use in order to set an example for orderly democratic governance in a highly fractured society, where you have different cultural traditions, where you have a mutual aspiration to make South Africa work. And you have to become more tolerant and respectful towards your fellow South African or foreigners also. We have to, people who come to South Africa with skills are more than welcome. And that is what we need to start contemplating. And it's the leadership, like young people like you, who have to carry out this message. That we need to reach a point where we can at least greet each other and live together and complain about the municipality's service delivery if we don't have proper municipal government.
Yes. One of the unique things about a municipality like Emfuleni is it has the privilege of housing two universities, the Vaal University of Technology and the Northwest University. Do you think these two institutions are playing a sufficient role in assisting this municipality move forward? What can be improved in that aspect, if there's anything?
That's a very important question you ask me, because we, since the 1990s, our campus was focused on getting people from the previously disadvantaged communities coming to the university. And the Vaal Technical VUT started with that long before us. The key to finding or to resolving that issue that you are talking about is to start working at the level of the primary school, or even at the creche level, engaging tomorrow's generation to a safety net of housing, accommodation, and away from poverty, a reasonable life, a reasonable income, a mutual support. And you have the saying in Africa, it takes a whole village to raise a child.
Yes.
And I don't see the village in our urban areas that we have today. The village effect of teaching the child. You understand?
Yes.
So it's close-knit communities you need. And once you have people standing together, not to protest, not to make war, but to communally address the problems they are experiencing and seeking opportunities to overcome these crises. Once we move in that direction, then we start going in the right direction. And I think personally that should we have the opportunity of getting more industries operating in this area because of our electricity supply, because of our water supply, and because of the number of people here that can perform very important tasks, that can turn around in a very good, successful affair. For example, I would say we are far better off than a town like Kroonstad, for example, or Brandfort in the Free State, in the rural parts, or even in Guati, where you do not have so many opportunities for people, and where there isn't a clear flow of capital in the townships and in the urban areas. You need a bit of that dynamic of a city effect to start nurturing this type of situation.
Okay. As we draw near to a close, Prof, what would you say that the formation of provinces in form of administrations might have caused an unintended consequence in a separated Vaal region?
Yeah.
The Vaal Triangle. I just want you to comment on that, because
Yeah,
many people have said the Vaal Triangle, which included Sasolburg, was actually a region that operated as a unit.
Yeah.
And since the formation of provinces, they tend to sort of no longer exist. So what is your take on that?
Okay, let me give you the example very quickly, because I've been thinking about this. And I've been looking at it from a water perspective, but I think when you get out of the sewage, if you stick your head out of the sewage, you start thinking about, why do we have this crisis? First of all, in Gauteng province, the most populous province in the country, and also the richest province in the country, you find that you have 3 metropolitan municipalities. There's Johannesburg, Emfuleni, and Tshwane.
Yes.
So these are big operations, and they can easily dwarf the provincial government, were it not for those political lines that had been drawn. And here you have this rural municipality trying to get out of the crap. So that is one example of the dilemma we are faced with. So if we can have industrial growth in this region, more industrial growth, and a greater tolerance on the side of the governance authorities like the Department of Water and Sanitation and the Department of Electricity, then we can start doing things here. If we get the private sector to buy in on this, it will start mushrooming. But we, as the residents in this area, must show a willingness to take the chance, explore the chance of securing that our children are raised well, they are well educated, they are well cared for within the communities we live. And from that you will find new routes, taking deeper control of the fertile soil on which we live, and providing with sufficient water supplies, we can provide a very successful, flourishing area for industrial development and commercial development. And I know the politicians are making lots of promises about airports and the like, and it's very good. But if that isn't built on a firm foundation of a mutual respect of human rights, especially for the underprivileged people in our communities, we're not going to get it far. Because that mutual respect needs to provide for education. And that's first and foremost what we have to give attention to. And I hope we will be able to enlarge the campus of the Northwest University and the Vaal University of Technology. That would be a symptom of growth and development. And I'm not talking like a politician. I'm just an ordinary father of 2 sons who are now elsewhere. They're not here. And and I know they will do well where they go, because they were raised well in their house and in the community that they lived in, because that community helped them to become the people they are today.
Thank you very much, Prof. As we close, I want you to comment a little bit about this item.
Yes.
What is this?
Okay. Now, I'm so glad you mentioned it. This is what engineers call a slide rule.
Okay.
Now, you and I, on our cell phones, we have electronic calculators. This was the calculator that engineers used, and it's in 3 sections, and you see all these lines are different measurements.
Yes.
And the engineers and mathematicians using the slide rule could calculate how the wall of the weir of the Vaal Dam was constructed without having any collapses in the system. So, and it was a tedious task, and they spent many hours designing this dam, and which became the storage facility of Upper South Africa, northern, or let's say Gauteng, Free State, and even downstream in the Northern Cape. And it came from this slide rule that was used by the engineer in charge of the project in the 1930s and 1940s. And part of the construction of the Vaal Dam was they used black people. And earlier on, when they started, they used poor white people to work on that. And then the labor opportunities for white people improved, and they left for the urban areas to work there. And eventually it was primarily the white management and the local black people who were responsible for the construction of this dam. Thanks to the slide rule, it's still standing today. Can you imagine what a crisis we'll have if the wall of the dam wall has to collapse overnight?
Sure.
Can you imagine? We would all drown pretty close to the river. Some academics we're going to miss, but not all of them. You take my word for it. And the same goes for ordinary people. Those people who want to learn to swim and know how to swim, they should stick into it and stay here and keep their roots deep in the moisture soils of the Vaal Triangle.
No, Prof, thank you very much.